Canada's energy sector is vital to not just our economic security, but our sovereignty overall. So, a lot of people in this federal election are talking about the energy sector. Now, some people are saying that, well, the Liberals might be different after ruining it for 10 years. I'm going to walk you through some shocking things that Liberal leader Mark Carney said, as well as his record, both in senior international roles, but also as the Liberal senior economic advisor on shutting down and stopping Canada's energy sector. This guy has no credibility on the energy sector, and if the Liberals get four more terms or another 4 years, it's just going to be like total disaster for Canada's energy sector. So let's walk through why that is. Let's start with the Liberals' record on the energy sector. So between 2015, when the Liberals were first elected, and 2020, Canada canceled 16 major energy projects, resulting in a $176 billion hit to our economy. Now, many of you are thinking about that from rightly from the perspective of what that would have meant to our economy right now, when it is so frail and not resilient to the threat of American tariffs. A lot of that is because the Liberals had this anti-energy sector agenda. So, for example, the Liberals, they killed the Energy East pipeline and passed Bill C-69, the No New Pipelines Law, which has made it all but impossible to build pipelines and energy infrastructure to strengthen the Canadian economy. The other thing is that recently the Parliamentary Budget Officer projected that this new emissions cap that Mark Carney is talking about keeping and expanding on Canadian energy will reduce oil and gas production by nearly 5%, which means it'll slash gross domestic product by $20.5 billion annually and eliminate 54,400 full-time jobs by 2032. That's a lot. Now, for people in my community here in Calgary, Nose Hill, that's something I hear over and over on the doors. People know these facts, right? They know the Liberals' track record. They don't trust the Liberals going forward. And they know that Mark Carney is he's going to make things worse. But let me show you why. So if you're in other parts of the country, everything that I just mentioned, Canada's energy sector, the need for it to be strong means jobs and economic security across the country, but it also means that we can protect our own energy sovereignty. Here is a visual of exactly how Alberta energy gets transported to parts of Eastern Canada right now, and you're going to quickly see what the problem is. Watch this video.
To transport Alberta oil to Quebec, it needs to go through the United States. Pipelines south of the border. That gives the Americans the power to cut off Canadians from our own energy supply.
So this is crazy at a time when we've had these threats of American tariffs and Canadians are looking for more sovereignty in their energy policy. You have a Liberal government who has for a decade been focused on preventing a pipeline that would go from Western Canada to Eastern Canada to build jobs, but also to protect Canadian sovereignty. Now, let's look at what Mark Carney has said recently, right? Because some people are saying like, oh, well, Mark Carney would be different. Well, actually, Mark Carney would be worse. Mark Carney was the Liberals' senior economic advisor for most of the time that they were pushing through this anti-energy agenda. And at the same time, he was doing that on the international stage. Even in the campaign, Mark Carney had an opportunity when he was in Calgary, for example, to say that he would repeal the No More Pipelines bill. Watch what he had to say when he was directly asked about this job-killing piece of legislation.
C-69 with your plans to build infrastructure in Canada, do you plan to repeal Bill C-69?
We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69, to answer your question directly.
So Mark Carney has said it right in the election campaign that he would actually keep this job-killing piece of legislation that has prevented Canada from building out infrastructure that would protect both its jobs and its energy sovereignty at the same time. So Mark Carney just said, I'm going to double down on a lost decade of Liberal policy, which has created this massive deficit in energy infrastructure that could have created jobs and security for Canada. The other thing that he said he would do during the campaign is keep the energy productions cap in Canada. So I'll show you a screenshot of an article here. So what he's essentially saying here is that he would keep a production cap on Canadian energy when the world needs more Canadian energy, right? So think about it right now. When you think about places in the world like the European Union, for example, that has become very dependent on Russian energy, for example, Canada could be meeting some of that needs. We could be meeting the needs of a lot of places around the world, a lot of our allies, including our own needs. But because Mark Carney has said that he would keep this production cap in place, it makes it very difficult to create that energy sovereignty, but also to create jobs and that economic growth that benefits every part of the country. Even think about things like our industries like steel, right? Canadian steel producers help build Canadian pipelines. But with Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines bill, which Mark Carney said he would keep, as well as this productions cap, at the same, what does that mean for steel producers? So like the downstream job impacts are also huge for Canada. So at a time when we should be thinking about strengthening the Canadian economy through things like natural resource development, here you've got Mark Carney, who is ideologically tied to keeping oil in the ground, saying he would be keeping these bills in place. Now, if you're saying, well, he's not ideologically tied to keeping oil in the ground, darn right he is. Here is a statement where he said it verbatim. Watch Mark Carney say that oil should stay in the ground.
Maybe up as much as half of oil reserves, proven reserves, need to stay in the ground if we're going to get to where we are. Maybe.
So he's saying, he's saying what he believes out loud there. And this isn't the first time that Mark Carney has said this. Now, I want to just take a pause for a minute and explain to people who might be watching this that Canada has one of the strictest environmental regulatory systems in the world. Between provincial and federal jurisdiction, there are so many reviews to make sure that any energy projects are managed in an environmentally sustainable way more than other places in the world where Canada actually imports some of its energy from, right? So not only would we be creating energy stability and sovereignty and jobs, but we would also be displacing energy from other jurisdictions around the world, which don't have the type of environmental review that Canada has had for decades, right? But here you've got a man in Mark Carney saying that oil needs to stay in the ground. This is his ideological bent. And this is why he said that he would not repeal Bill C-69 and that the No More Pipelines bill, and why he said that he would keep the production cap in place. But this isn't the first time that Mark Carney has said this. He said this like countless times. He made an entire career over the last decade of essentially pumping policy wherein Canadian oil should stay in the ground. He even went as far as to put together something called the GFANZ banking scheme, which has sort of fallen apart. But it was all about forcing financial institutions to divest from things like Canadian energy. And frankly, he also even went as far as to praise Greta Thunberg, the very radical far left environmental advocate, who says that activist who doesn't believe that there should be any sort of carbon energy production, even though we know that the world needs it and they need Canadian energy, which is produced in an environmentally sustainable way. Now, if you still had doubts, if you're listening to this and go like, wow, Mark Carney didn't mean all of that. Well, first of all, he said it during the campaign, so he does. But also he recruited two uber far left extreme anti-energy activists as star candidates. So for example, well, he did more than two, but he promoted Stephen Guilbeault, who has been the architect of a lot of the Liberals' anti-energy policies. He promoted him into a Quebec lieutenant position after he became prime minister. So he put this man who has an anti-energy sector agenda into an even more prominent role. And then he also recruited former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson as a star candidate in that area. And this man has a very well documented history of fighting against energy projects and even pushed a natural gas ban. So when you think about why these two men would be running for Mark Carney, these two men have spent their entire lives forcefully pushing radical policy that opposes Canada's energy sector. Why are they running for Mark Carney? Because they're running for him because they know that he will keep their radical agenda going forward. The thing is, though, is that there might be another reason why Mark Carney is pushing this radical anti-energy agenda. Mark Carney was the chair of Brookfield Corporation. He still hasn't publicly disclosed his assets, what assets he might still hold in that company. While Mark Carney was the chair of Brookfield, it invested in numerous oil and gas policy projects in countries other than Canada, including the United States and in China. So if Canada comes on stream and Canadian energy is able to flow to tide waters across the country, that could displace some of these projects that Brookfield invested in. And he could, again, we don't know what he has, personal assets in there because he hasn't publicly disclosed them. The point is he could have a financial interest in Canadian energy not succeeding. So all of this put together, for anybody who thinks that the Liberals, after 10 years of ruining Canada's energy sector, are somehow going to magically, strengthen our energy sovereignty, have another think, guys. Even during the campaign, there's so much proof to show that the Liberals have an anti-energy sector agenda. I'm going to close with this. Um, Even people in Calgary. So, for example, the Liberals have had MPs in Calgary before. For example, Canter in Calgary Centre. I remember when he originally ran, he said he would pound on the table for pipelines. Then he ended up voting for bills, anti-energy sector bills, in the same vein as the No More Pipelines law, right? Also, George Chahal, a current Calgary MP. He was actually the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. And anytime there was an opportunity to vote against Canadian energy, George did that, right? That Liberal caucus is so whipped to be anti-energy sector. And think about it. You've got Stephen Guilbeault as the Quebec lieutenant. You have Gregor Robertson that's trying to enter the caucus. These guys are radical extremists that have long opposed Canada's energy sector. That is the tone and tenor that the Liberal Party is going to bring to energy policy, and that's why we need a change of government. Now, by contrast, in a hopeful, positive move, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has come out and said, yes, environmental review is it's important. Canada has one of the strongest regimes in the world. However, the No More Pipelines bill, it just adds bureaucracy and it stops projects from being built. So we're going to repeal that because we fought it every step of the way. We're also going to create a national energy corridor. Sorry, guys, I've got a bit of cold still. And this plan is going to streamline environmental review. So we still have that environmental integrity, but that the environmental review process can't be used by radical activists to just stop projects from being built, which is what we often see all the time. This has been the hallmark of the Liberal government, is that rather than getting to a yes or a no in a specific period of time, the Liberals have changed the system such that they can just drag the puck and no capital comes into Canada or stays in Canada to build these projects out. And guys, what that means is that we're more reliant on other countries, that the Americans have control over our energy sovereignty, and that we're not getting the jobs and GDP that we need to build our economy out. So share this video, especially going into, it's a holiday weekend. There's a lot of important holidays that are being observed this weekend, and people will be getting together and talking about these important issues. Just know that the Liberals, their 10 years of Liberal decimation of the energy sector, not only will it continue with the new candidates that they've recruited, and Mark Carney is a lifelong ideologue against Canadian energy, it's probably going to get worse. And that's why it's so important to vote Conservative. Share this video. Working hard for you. Have a great day.